There's a level of consistency on this channel that you haven't seen for months going on, so I hope you enjoy it while it lasts. Today, we're going to talk all about electric vehicles. I imagine you're familiar with Tesla. Who isn't at this point? But beyond Tesla, there's been a massive boom in electric vehicle selections across the world. You've got, you've got Rivian, you've got Lucid rolling out with extremely competitive products for, you know, going off-road and staying on the road, respectively. You've got new electric offerings coming out of major manufacturers like Ford, GM, Tata. There's a lot going on in the electric vehicle space, and I think it's a great time to really realize and come to terms with the fact that EVs are a much better option for most people than they realize. The main reason I say this is actually the range. Whenever we hear about electric vehicles, the main concern that gets floated across is, oh, the range is only 100 miles, it's only 200 miles. How is that possibly going to work? But if you think about it, the average US consumer only has about 15 miles a day of driving. That's not bad. And 15 miles per day, even if you say it's 15 miles one way, 30 miles a day, that's less than 200 miles an entire week, which implies that the average US consumer with a very small electric vehicle with a range of less than 200 miles could go an entire week without charging. And the fact of the matter is, the majority of vehicle users are not taking very long road trips. They're not going, to the ends of the earth with their vehicles. They're commuting. They're going to school. They're going to work. And that works out perfectly for them, especially when you consider the fact that even if they don't have charging facilities at home, which a lot of folks do, and that's an increasing number, a lot of workplaces and schools are creating charging places at their respective spaces. And that's fantastic, because if you think about it, you're going to be at work for at least 8 hours a day, most of the time. And 8 hours is plenty of time to fully charge most EVs. So, assuming you go to work even a few days a week, chances are your car can stay topped up pretty comfortably. And if you do think about, situations in which someone is road tripping their vehicle pretty often, does need more range than that, people like myself, then there are variants of EVs as well. If you have ever heard of range extended hybrids, and we'll do a later episode on this, but they're essentially electric vehicles with an onboard petrol or diesel powered generator. And it really eliminates the need for charging if you don't want to do so. You can drive as long as the battery lasts, and then as long as it's full of fuel, it'll turn on the generator and it will keep producing more electricity to keep the car going. It's a much more efficient setup than a traditional hybrid system, because there's only one direction for power to flow. The engine never powers the wheels. All it does is produces electricity for the electric motors. It's also way more comfortable as a result, and I believe one of the best long-distance EV options out there. Beyond range, which is usually the main concern people bring up for EVs, there's some really great benefits that need to be considered. First of all is comfort. I'm a car guy, so it does kind of pain me to say this, but the fact is most people aren't. They don't care about having a manual transmission or hearing the engine note when you're on a highway. People don't care. And in realizing that, EVs are an amazing option. They're dead silent all the time, and they're incredibly comfortable. And even I have to admit that there is absolutely a time where I just want to travel in silence. I mean, that's why luxury cars are so popular. We've spent decades trying to make petrol engines quieter, so why not just skip all of that nonsense and get an EV altogether in the first place? Saves us a lot of effort. Beyond comfort while driving, another neat perk of EVs is preconditioning. So a lot of gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles have started offering this recently, but the ability to have your vehicle set to the correct temperature before you get to it. And as I mentioned, although a lot of internal combustion vehicles have started offering this feature, what you have to think about is you can't do this in a closed space. If it's in a garage or a parking structure, you can't precondition your vehicle, obviously, because the emissions build up, carbon monoxide is quite toxic, and it can make people unconscious or worse. So, with an EV, you can precondition your car no matter where it's parked. And that's a really nice perk, especially if you live in the Midwest. An additional piece is really they're pretty low maintenance, and by which I mean usually if you talk to any Tesla workshop, for example, the main piece of work that they're going to have to do to those cars is change brakes, and because of regenerative braking, that's not going to be very often either. So really, you've taken a lot of time back from your life right there, not having to go in for oil changes or anything of the like. It's a great low maintenance setup. There's, one moving part per motor. So comparing that to a traditional internal combustion engine with tens of thousands of moving components, all operating very precisely, it really cuts out a lot of the mess, and it makes that car easier to take care of for a lot longer. And in fact, because of a lot of the electronics on board, it kind of spells out if there is anything that needs to be done, and that's fantastic for the average consumer as well. So now let's touch on one last point that I don't believe people talk about enough, and that is charging time. As with the range argument, a major counterpoint people will bring up is that charging takes a long time. It takes 30 minutes to an hour to charge up the vehicle some considerable, measurable amount. And I'm here to mention this to suggest that that's not really a significant issue. First of all, chargers are getting much faster every year. We all really know that, and we know that over the next couple of years, charging is going to be a lot faster than it is now. Indeed, the way it is now relative to 2 years ago. It's a really good thing to consider. But beyond that, if you think about the fact that the majority of the time you are going to be charging at home, at school, at work, you're only really going to be charging externally at a supercharger or at a third-party service station, at a third-party charging station. When you go on road trips, for the average person, that's going to be about 3 times a year. Assuming your destination is 500 miles away, which is again on the higher end, you're going to be charging your vehicle about 3 times per trip. That translates to 9 hours of charge time per year, during which you're actively being put out of convenience. For the rest of the charge time, you're just doing work or going to class or sitting at home, and it's not affecting your life at all. But for these 9 hours a year, you are going to be charging. But if you think about it, how does that work with a gasoline car? You're going to be filling up, on average, a couple times a month. And at 15 minutes per fuel stop, which is, again, a pretty reasonable average, that is 30 minutes a month. If you multiply that by 12 months of the year, you end up with 6 hours of fueling time per year. So, first reaction is 3 hours. I'm saving 3 hours by having a gasoline vehicle, but you're forgetting the maintenance piece. With an electric vehicle, there is no scheduled annual maintenance, or at least nothing that is really going to be a significant issue for you. But for a gasoline vehicle, doing the sort of mileage figures we talked about, you're going to be going in for servicing at least twice a year, and each time it's going to be at least 2 hours of work. That adds 4 hours right there, and right away, even assuming that neither car has any mechanical failure that deserves additional mechanical attention, the math suggests that you're actually wasting more of your life with an internal combustion vehicle in terms of fueling and maintenance than you are with an electric vehicle doing the exact same things at the exact same mileage. So there you have it. The charging argument, yes, it's intimidating because it's 30 minutes at a time, but assuming that doesn't get any better over time, which would be incorrect, it's not really that bad when you add it up, and when you consider the fact that there are many ways in which EVs can be built into our existing lives to minimize the disruption they have to them. There is one note that I want to add as sort of an aside, and we can explore in a later video, which is the pollution argument. Yes, lithium cobalt production for EVs is something that needs a lot of attention as far as improving it and reducing the environmental impact. I'm not denying that at all. But if you think about it, the same can be said for oil and gas and all of the petroleum production that goes into internal combustion vehicles. And we found a way to make that work, at least to a degree that we find acceptable. So there's no reason the same can't be done for mining over time. And even if you do want to also add in the fact that EVs are running on electricity, and even if you do want to, and additionally, if you want to consider the source of energy that the electric vehicles are running on, again, yes, it might be fossil fuels in quite a few situations depending on where you live, but you have to consider two things. One, a large fossil fuel power generation station is massively more efficient than an individual petrol engine, in other words, which is a tiny fossil fuel engine in a vehicle. It's just far more efficient. It uses far less fuel per unit of energy to produce that at a power station. Additionally, it's a lot easier to transition to renewable energy if you only have one source or if you have fewer sources. As we're already seeing, transitioning to electric vehicles at the individual scale is incredibly difficult because everyone is an individual consumer who feels they need a solution tailored to them. That doesn't really apply at power generation. It's much easier to create a large-scale solution that provides a lot of clean energy. All in all, I find the discussion around EVs a pretty interesting one, and it's really one that we're only going to be able to have once in our lifetime. And I think it's a worthy one to actually think about and actually consider the different factors that go into it rather than just believing these bite-sized the sound bites that get thrown all over the internet. So think about it, and you might realize that it's a better option than you think it is.